All right, let's go. Number 10, the Nabataeans of Petra, the city that vanished for 1,000 years. In 106 AD, the Roman Emperor Trajan absorbed the Nabataean kingdom into the empire without a single major battle. No siege, no massacre. A civilization that had carved an entire city into rose-red sandstone cliffs in the southern Jordanian desert. A city of temples, tombs, and water channels engineered with a precision that still baffles modern hydrologists. Simply accepted Roman authority and continued functioning. For centuries, Petra thrived under Rome. At its peak, it housed 30,000 people. It controlled the spice routes from Arabia to the Mediterranean. Its merchants were some of the wealthiest traders in the ancient world. They had invented a writing system that would evolve directly into the Arabic script used by over 1 billion people today. But here is where the story cracks open into something deeply unsettling. In 363 AD, a massive earthquake struck. Half the city collapsed. The water systems, the intricate network of channels, cisterns, and dams that made life possible in the desert, were shattered. And then something extraordinary happened. The people left. Not all at once, not in a single day, but over the following centuries, Petra emptied. Trade routes shifted. The Byzantine Empire looked elsewhere. And by the 7th century, the city carved into the living rock of the Jordanian desert was essentially abandoned. It stayed that way for over 1,000 years. When the Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt rediscovered it in 1812, disguised as an Arab pilgrim because he knew no Westerner would be permitted to enter, he found a city preserved in stone, exactly as its last inhabitants had left it. Tombs still sealed, facades still carved. A civilization frozen in the moment of its own forgetting. Petra is fully excavated today, and archaeologists estimate that less than 15% of the city has been uncovered. 85% of what the Nabataeans built still lies beneath the desert sand. We do not know what is down there, and the stone keeps its silence perfectly. Number 9. The Olmecs, the civilization that destroyed its own face. Around 1500 BC, in the swampy lowlands of what is now the Mexican states of Veracruz and Tabasco, a civilization appeared that had no clear predecessor. The Olmecs built the first large-scale ceremonial centers in Mesoamerica. They developed the first writing system in the Western Hemisphere. They conceived the long count calendar that the Maya would later use. They built massive earthen pyramids. They established trade networks stretching thousands of kilometers. And they carved heads. Enormous basalt heads, 17 discovered so far, each one weighing between 6 and 50 tons, each one bearing a unique face, each one wearing what appears to be a helmet. The largest stands nearly 3.5 meters tall. The stone they used came from the Tuxtla Mountains, over 90 kilometers away. Moving these blocks across swamps, rivers, and jungle, without wheels, without metal tools, and without draft animals, would be a significant engineering challenge today. But here is where the nightmare begins. At some point between roughly 400 and 350 BC, the Olmec civilization collapsed. No one knows exactly why. Volcanic activity, environmental degradation, and internal political upheaval have all been proposed. But here is the detail that no theory fully explains. Before they left, someone, the Olmecs themselves most likely, deliberately mutilated the colossal heads. They were defaced, buried. In some cases, the facial features were carefully, methodically destroyed. This was not the work of invaders. The pattern of damage is too deliberate, too consistent, too intimate. These were not statues of gods being destroyed by conquering enemies. This was a civilization erasing its own rulers, canceling its own history. Choosing, for reasons we cannot recover, to bury the faces of whoever those helmeted figures represented. The heads sit in Mexican museums today. Their hollow eyes stare at nothing. The faces that were left intact are hauntingly specific. These are portraits of real individuals, not idealized gods. Someone chose to destroy them. That someone is gone. And the jungle that swallowed La Venta, San Lorenzo, and Tres Zapotes has given back only fragments of what was buried there. Number 8. The Indus Valley Civilization. 5 million people and a dead language. In 1921, Archaeologist Daya Sani began excavating a mound in what is now Pakistan called Harappa. What emerged from the ground over the following years rewrote the history of South Asia. A city. A planned, engineered, sophisticated city with straight streets on a grid, standardized fired brick of uniform dimensions, a sewage system more advanced than anything in contemporary Egypt or Mesopotamia, and public baths suggesting a culture with complex notions of ritual cleanliness. Harappa was not alone. Mohenjo-Daro, Dholavira, Rocky Gari. By the time the full extent of the Indus Valley civilization was mapped, researchers had identified over 1,000 settlement sites across what is now Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan. At its peak, around 2600 BC, the Indus Valley civilization covered an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. Its population has been estimated at 5 million people. But here is where the silence becomes deafening. They had writing. Thousands of inscribed seals and tablets have been found. Short texts, consistent symbols, clearly a functional script used in trade and administration. And we cannot read a single word of it. The Indus script remains completely undeciphered. No bilingual text, no Rosetta Stone, no descendant script that gives us a foothold. Just symbols, repeated across hundreds of sites, carrying a meaning that died with the civilization that created it. And then, around 1900 BC, it ended. Not with conquest, not with a single catastrophic event. The cities were simply abandoned. The population dispersed. The standardized brick sizes, the sewage systems, the trade networks, all of it stopped. Some scholars point to climate change and the drying of the Ghaggar-Hakra river system. Others suggest disease. Others, migration pressure from the northwest. What no scholar can explain is the completeness of the disappearance. No successor state. No cultural continuity that preserves their language. No oral tradition that carries their name forward. 5 million people, and we do not know what they called themselves. We do not know what they believed. We cannot read what they wrote. The seals sit in the National Museum in New Delhi, covered in symbols that have defeated every attempt at decipherment for over a century. Number 7. The Mycenaeans, killed by people with no name. In 1876, Heinrich Schliemann excavated the shaft graves at Mycenae in Greece and found gold masks, bronze weapons, and the unmistakable remains of a warrior aristocracy that had dominated the Bronze Age Aegean. The Mycenaeans built Cyclopean walls, stone blocks so massive that later Greeks believed they could only have been built by giants. They administered a complex palace economy using a script called Linear B, the earliest known form of Greek. They traded with Egypt, the Levant, Cyprus, and Italy. By 1200 BC, the Mycenaean palace system was at the height of its sophistication. Pylos, Tiryns, Mycenae itself. Elaborate bureaucracies recorded in clay tablets every transaction, every ration, every military deployment. But here is where the world ends. Between roughly 1200 and 1150 BC, every single Mycenaean palace was destroyed, burned. In some cases, destroyed multiple times. Pylos shows evidence of hasty, last-minute defensive preparations. The Linear B tablets from its final days record emergency requisitioning of rowers, soldiers, and watchers posted along the coastline. Someone was coming, and the scribes of Pylos knew it. The Egyptians called them the Sea Peoples. We still do not know who they were. Egyptian records describe a coalition of groups with names: Peliset, Jeker, Shekelesh, Denyen, Weshesh, that do not correspond clearly to any known civilization. They destroyed the Hittites. They destroyed the Ugarit. They attacked Egypt twice, and then they vanished from the historical record. What they left behind was a dark age. Greece entered 2 centuries of population collapse, illiteracy, and isolation. The Linear B script disappeared entirely. When Greek civilization re-emerged, it used a completely different alphabet, borrowed from the Phoenicians. The connection to the Mycenaean past was so completely severed that later Greeks regarded the Cyclopean walls of Mycenae and Tiryns as the work of mythological beings, because no living memory remained of who had actually built them. Number 6. The Hittites, the superpower that ceased to exist overnight. In 1274 BC, the Hittite king Muwatalli II led what may have been the largest chariot battle in history against Ramses II of Egypt at Kadesh in modern Syria. Neither side won decisively. The result was the world's first recorded peace treaty, the Egyptian-Hittite Treaty, a copy of which hangs today at the entrance to the United Nations Security Council chamber in New York. The Hittites were not a minor power. They had controlled Anatolia, modern Turkey, for 500 years. They had sacked Babylon. They had developed iron-working technology that gave them a military advantage over every neighboring civilization. They corresponded with the pharaohs of Egypt as equals, addressing each other as Great King and Brother. Their capital, Hattusa, in the mountains of central Anatolia, was a fortified city of extraordinary sophistication. But here is where history simply stops. Around 1180 BC, Hattusa was burned to the ground. The Hittite Empire ceased to exist. Not diminished, not conquered and absorbed, ceased to exist as a functioning political entity within what appears to be a single generation. The last known Hittite king is Suppiluliuma II, who appears in records around 1200 BC, engaged in naval battles and military campaigns. After that, nothing. No records, no successor state in the Anatolian heartland. No clear account of what happened to the royal family, the priesthood, the army, or the millions of people who lived under Hittite rule. The city of Hattusa shows signs of organized abandonment, valuables removed, sacred objects taken, suggesting the end was not entirely sudden. But where did they go? Scholars point again to the sea peoples, to drought, to internal revolt. No single explanation is satisfying. What remains is Hattusa, sitting on a wind-swept plateau in central Turkey. You can walk through its gates today. The stone foundations of its temples and palaces cover several square kilometers, and the civilization that built it vanished so completely that even its existence was forgotten, until a Swiss scholar named Charles Texier stumbled upon the ruins in 1834, completely unable to identify what he was looking at. Number 5. Cahokia, the city that North America forgot it had. Around 1050 AD, something remarkable happened in the floodplain of the Mississippi River near what is now St. Louis, Missouri. A city appeared. Not a village, not a town. A city, by any reasonable definition, with a population estimated at between 10 and 20,000 people at its peak, making it larger than London was at the same moment in history. Cahokia's builders raised over 120 earthen mounds across a site covering roughly 14 square kilometers. The largest, Monk's Mound, has a base larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. It rises 30 meters. It was constructed entirely by human labor, basket by basket of earth, over generations. The city had a central plaza, a wooden palisade wall nearly 3 kilometers long, and neighborhoods of thatched houses arranged in deliberate patterns. But here is where the silence of North American history becomes genuinely horrifying. By 1350 AD, Cahokia was empty. 300 years after its founding, the largest pre-Columbian city north of Mexico had been completely abandoned. No European explorer ever saw it inhabited. When Hernando de Soto pushed through the Mississippi Valley in 1541, he found Cahokia gone. Only the mounds remaining, and no indigenous group in the region claiming descent from whoever had built them. Why did they leave? The leading theories involve deforestation, flooding, political instability, and drought. But none of them fully account for the totality of the abandonment. The people of Cahokia left and dispersed so completely that no surviving culture clearly identifies as their descendant. A city of 20,000 people, the capital of what archaeologists now call the Mississippian culture, disappeared from human memory before European contact. We named it after a small tribe who happened to be living near the mounds in the 1600s, a tribe that had no historical connection to the city's builders. Monk's Mound still stands. You can drive to it today, 20 minutes from downtown St. Louis. It is the largest pre-Columbian structure north of Mexico, and almost no one knows it exists. Number 4. The Minoans of Crete, survivors who were erased anyway. Around 2000 BC, on the island of Crete in the eastern Mediterranean, a civilization arose that would remain unique in the ancient world for over 1,000 years. The Minoans, named by Arthur Evans, who excavated their palace complex at Knossos beginning in 1900, built multi-story palaces with indoor plumbing, fresco-covered walls, and storage systems capable of managing agricultural surpluses for tens of thousands of people. Their art depicts dolphins, octopuses, lilies, and acrobats leaping over bowls, a civilization that appears, uniquely among Bronze Age cultures, to have prioritized beauty. They had writing, 2 scripts in fact. The older one, called Linear A, remains completely undeciphered. The Minoans traded across the entire Mediterranean. They appear to have had no defensive walls around their palace complexes, suggesting either extraordinary confidence in their naval power or a cultural relationship with the concept of warfare that we do not understand. But here is where the catastrophe arrives. Around 1628 BC, the volcano on the nearby island of Thera, modern Santorini, erupted in one of the largest volcanic events of the past 10,000 years. The explosion was heard across the entire eastern Mediterranean. A tsunami generated by the caldera collapse struck Crete. The ashfall disrupted agriculture. The Minoan civilization was severely weakened. They survived, but in a diminished state they were absorbed, culturally, politically, militarily, by the Mycenaeans, who occupied Crete around 1450 BC. The Mycenaeans adopted elements of Minoan culture. They used a modified version of Minoan writing to create Linear B. But the Minoan identity, whatever it was, whatever language they spoke, whatever gods they worshipped in their own words, was absorbed and overwritten. Linear A, their original script, has never been deciphered. We do not know what the Minoans called themselves. We do not know what they called their gods. Their palace at Knossos, reconstructed by Evans in a way that later archaeologists have criticized as creative speculation, receives millions of visitors a year. They walk through a building that no living human tradition remembers from the inside. Number 3. The Anasazi, the people who left dinner on the table. In the Four Corners region of the American Southwest, where Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico meet, a people archaeologists call the Ancestral Puebloans, and whom the Navajo called Anasazi, built something extraordinary. Beginning around 900 AD, they constructed cliff dwellings of breathtaking engineering precision. Cliff Palace at Mesa Verde, Colorado, contains over 150 rooms and 23 kivas, built into the overhang of a sheer sandstone cliff. The structures required the transportation of thousands of sandstone blocks and tons of mortar up near vertical cliff faces. These were not primitive shelters. These were defended, planned, multi-generational architectural achievements. Chaco Canyon in New Mexico served as what appears to have been a regional ceremonial and administrative center, connected to outlying communities by a road network extending over 400 kilometers. But here is where the story becomes genuinely disturbing. Around 1300 AD, the cliff dwellings were abandoned, not gradually, not over generations, but quickly. Archaeologists excavating sites throughout the region have found food still in storage vessels, pottery still on hearths, tools left mid-use. The evidence consistently suggests a departure that was rapid enough to leave behind things that people do not normally leave behind. They did not die there. There are almost no human remains in the abandoned dwellings. They left. They went somewhere. The leading theory, supported by oral traditions of several Pueblo peoples in the region, is that drought, combined with social breakdown and possibly internal violence, forced a migration south and east toward the Rio Grande. But the cliff dwellings they left behind remain exactly as their last inhabitants left them, 700 years ago. The T-shaped doorways. The finger-pressed mortar. The black-on-white pottery sitting in the shadows. Cliff Palace at Mesa Verde receives hundreds of thousands of visitors a year. The rooms that once housed families are now behind velvet ropes, and no one, walking through them, can fully answer the most basic question. Why did they leave so fast that they didn't take everything? Number 2. The Maya. When the hieroglyphs went silent. The Maya civilization of Mesoamerica was, by any reasonable measure, one of the greatest intellectual achievements in human history. Beginning around 2000 BC and reaching its classic period peak between 250 and 900 AD, the Maya developed a fully phonetic writing system, one of only 5 independently invented writing systems in human history. They calculated the length of the solar year to within minutes of the modern measurement. They predicted eclipses centuries in advance. They built Tikal, Palenque, Copan, and Caracol, cities of pyramids, palaces, and astronomical observatories stretching across the jungles of Guatemala, Mexico, Belize, and Honduras. At its peak, the Maya lowland population has been estimated at between 3 and 13 million people. The cities were connected by trade, by dynastic marriage, by shared religious ceremony, and by political competition that expressed itself in warfare, monument building, and the erection of stelae, stone columns inscribed with the long count dates and dynastic histories of individual rulers. But here is where civilization simply stops speaking. Between 800 and 1000 AD, the classic Maya cities of the southern lowlands collapsed, one by one. The last known long count date carved in stone in the southern lowland region comes from the site of Tonina, Stela 10, dated to 909 AD. After that, silence. The carving of dated monuments stopped. The royal dynasties whose genealogies had been meticulously recorded in stone for centuries simply ceased to inscribe themselves. The cities were not immediately abandoned. People continued to live in them, in diminished numbers, without kings, without monumental construction. But the civilization that had organized itself around dynastic power, astronomical precision, and hieroglyphic recording of history was over. The causes are debated and are almost certainly multiple: drought, warfare, agricultural collapse, political fragmentation. But the sheer scale of the failure is staggering. 13 million people, 500 years of recorded dynastic history, a writing system of extraordinary sophistication, and it contracted, within a century, into silence and jungle. When Spanish missionaries arrived in the 16th century, they found the Maya still present, but the classic cities were already ruins. Bishop Diego de Landa burned virtually every Maya book he could find in 1562, calling them works of the devil. 4 Maya codices survive in European museums today. 4. From a civilization of millions that wrote prolifically for centuries. The jungle continues to give back fragments. New LiDAR surveys have revealed that the Maya urban landscape was vastly larger than previously understood. Millions of people living in an interconnected network of cities that modern archaeology is only beginning to map. Most of it remains unexcavated. The hieroglyphs that have been recovered fill entire libraries of scholarship, and the ones still buried wait in the dark, below the roots. Number 1. Rapa Nui, the statues abandoned mid-creation. On April 5, 1722, Easter Sunday, Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen became the first European to set eyes on a tiny volcanic island in the southeastern Pacific Ocean, nearly 3,700 kilometers from the coast of Chile and over 2,000 kilometers from the nearest inhabited island. He named it Easter Island. The people who lived there, perhaps a few thousand in conditions of extraordinary hardship, called it Rapa Nui. What Roggeveen found defied easy explanation. Standing along the coastline on stone platforms called ahu were enormous humanoid statues, moai, carved from volcanic tuff, averaging 4 meters in height and 14 tons in weight, their backs to the ocean, their hollow eyes facing inland. Nearly 900 of them had been carved in total. They represented, the islanders told later researchers, the deified ancestors of the clans, figures of protective power, erected to watch over the living. But here is where the horror crystallizes into something permanent. In the quarry at Rano Raraku, on the inner slope of the volcano from which most moai were carved, nearly 400 statues remain. Unfinished, abandoned mid-carving, the tools left where they fell. Some statues lie on their backs, their features still emerging from the rock face, as if the sculptors simply stood up one day and never returned. The largest statue ever attempted at Rano Raraku, called El Gigante, is 21 meters long and would have weighed approximately 160 tons. It was never finished. It was never moved. It lies in the quarry still, half attached to the rock that made it. What happened? The civilization of Rapa Nui collapsed catastrophically before European contact, driven by deforestation, resource exhaustion, clan warfare, and possibly a rat population explosion that destroyed the island's ability to regenerate its palm forests. The population that had once numbered perhaps 15,000 fell to a few thousand, living among the ruins of their own ambition. And then came the final erasure. Peruvian slave raiders in 1862 kidnapped approximately 1,500 Rapa Nui, including virtually the entire educated class, the priests and scholars who could read Rongo Rongo, the indigenous script carved onto wooden tablets. Rongo Rongo remains undeciphered. When the surviving slaves were eventually returned to the island, fewer than 100 of them, they brought smallpox with them. By 1877, the Rapa Nui population had fallen to 111 people. The knowledge of how to read Rongo Rongo died with the people who knew it. 27 tablets survive in museums around the world. Their inscriptions have resisted every attempt at decipherment for over a century. We do not know what they say. We do not know what the Moai were really meant to do, or what ceremony accompanied their erection, or what the islanders believed would happen if they stopped building them. What we know is this: at some point, they did stop. The tools were dropped. The quarry fell silent. The greatest statues were left half-born in the rock, and the island, remote, windswept, impossibly isolated in the middle of the largest ocean on Earth, kept every secret it had been given. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.